Okay, I can call this meeting to order, and it is exactly 10 a.m. And I'd like to welcome everyone. With that, I want to comment that we do have all committee members are present. So with that, I would like to respectfully acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabeg under the terms of the Robinson-Huron Treaty number 61 of the 1850 and the Williams Treaties of 1923. We commit to acknowledge, learn, educate, create opportunity, honor sacred places, and take actions toward real truth and reconciliation in support of our commitment to walking the path together in respect, peace, and harmony for future generations. So with that, I do have a motion to adopt the agenda moved by Councillor Fitzgerald, seconded by Councillor Armour. It is recommended that the Planning Committee agenda dated April 21st, 2022 be hereby adopted as printed and circulated. All those in favor? Thank you, and that is carried. So with that, I would ask if there are any declarations of pecuniary interest, and I understand there is one. Yes, Mayor Terziano?
Yes, the same one that I declared last week on the first application, Springfield Road.
Okay, thank you for that. All right, so as some members of the public will know, this is a continuation. The meeting today is a continuation of our meeting on April 13th. We just ran out of time. So with this, we can now proceed with item number 4.1, which is under previous business. But before we start, as a general comment, I would like to say to the applicants or their agents who might be watching this, if they wish to make comments regarding their applications, could they please raise their hand after the staff presentation, and then they will be brought into the discussion. And if they could request to first state their name and mailing address, and to please note that the presentations are only limited to 10 minutes. Okay, with that, Richard, you're up with Z21 2021 HT Tursky 442 Springfield Road.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, just share my screen. So thank you, through you, Madam Chair. A public meeting was held respecting this application on March 16th, 2022. As outlined in the previous report, staff recommended that council deny this application. Following consideration, on March 16th, committee passed a motion to postpone the matter to provide time for the applicant to submit additional information in the form of a satisfactory report containing information respecting flood risk, vulnerability, and mitigation matters, including elevations for Springfield Road, the location of the proposed Dryland Boathouse, and the dwelling and additions. Additional information has now been provided in the form of an additional hazard assessment and additional design drawings, which are contained in the report. To refresh committee's memory, the application was for the construction of an addition to the dwelling, and on both the front end and on the sides, and was for the construction of a dryland boathouse. The additions would be 48 square meters and the dryland boathouse would be 93 square meters. The property is zoned natural resources, exception 1302, and is designated waterfront. One of the issues on this property is, as committee would remember, is floodplain, and the site-specific exception dictates that the only permitted dwelling would be a 112 square meter dwelling. So the additions triggered the need for this zoning application. One of the issues that we were asking this applicant to look at was how deep the floodwaters were on the property, along the driveway, and at a point on Springfield Road that was identified as a potential barrier to access to the property. Again, this is the proposal. The additions shown to the front of the house, on the sides, and this is the Dryland Boathouse. These were drawings shared last time, and these are new drawings that were requested by committee. They're attached to the report, but they show the additions on the sides and the addition at the front. And if you zoom in, they also show mitigation measures that were discussed last time, like the void underneath the addition to the side, and the fact that there would be this addition on the front would be mounted on piers. Also provided was the elevations that were requested, and they show that the dwelling itself is above the regulatory flood, and however portions of the driveway would be below. With respect to the access issue, they show that the roadway is above what's termed the flood elevation, for the static flood elevation for Fairy Lake. But one of the things staff pointed out is that when you factor in the wave uprush factor, they would be below that elevation. These are pictures from the previous report and were previously presented to committee. So on review of this additional information, which was also circulated to the district, it's staff's view that our previous analysis, as outlined in our previous report, continues to apply. The official plan states that new development and site alteration is not permitted below the regulatory flood elevation, except for minor expansions to existing legal non-conforming uses and other exceptions like flood and erosion control structures or marine-related structures such as docks, decks, and non-habitable boathouses. So in our view, this development is not minor in scale. With respect to the access, landowners beyond the low point in Springfield Road would still be subject to some flood risk if the wave uprush factor from the lake is taken into consideration. As noted in district staff's revised comments, the proposed development does not constitute a minor addition and would result in further encroachment into the floodway. As such, district staff are unable to recommend approval. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that committee might have.
Thank you for that, Richard. I will repeat, if the applicant is here or their agent and would like to speak to this, perhaps they could raise their hand and then Jennifer can let them in.
The applicant or their representative are reminded to use the raise hand button to indicate that they would like to address committee. And Chair Alcock, I do see one hand and I'll now bring them into the meeting.
Thank you. There we go. Welcome.
Yeah, good morning, Chair Alcock and committee. Sorry, I was a bit tardy getting in here. I was wondering if I was going to be able to do it or not. I think it's more operational malfunction on my end, but anyways, I'm here. So thanks. And I just wanted to first bring up with respect to the site plan. I just caught the tail end of what the planner was saying, but we did supply a new site plan that clearly showed that we're removing the gazebo that was out front and that dryland deck / boathouse near the shoreline. So those are definitely being removed. Also identified the setback to the Dryland Boathouse from the shoreline at 182 feet. Also identified the size of the additions at the front and the side. And I think one question from committee last time was how far did the extension of the front addition extend out? And the answer to that is 11 feet closer to the shoreline. The elevations are correct, identified by the planner. Single story additions, and certainly there's the void, if you will, under the addition to be above the regulatory flood elevation. And the site plan, of course, was one of the items to be addressed from the last meeting, and also the updated flood report prepared by Duke Engineering. I certainly appreciate the efforts in working with staff to bring the application forward and the additional information. I just wanted to address a couple of comments that were made, and I've already have, but the fact of the matter is the gazebo in the Dryland Boathouse will be removed, definitely. With respect to the shoreline revegetation, that typically is addressed through site plan control, so we have to bring it up to comply with the town standards in terms of additional vegetation and meeting the 15-meter width and depth amenity area identified along the shoreline. We wouldn't be able to get a building permit until that was done. With respect to the terminology regarding minor, to me it's a relative term, and there is little direction in the town's official plan. I think it's more based on impact versus a numerical value. The cottage footprint is increasing from 1,291 square feet to 1,805 square feet. So there would be an additional 510 square feet added to the cottage. I still think it's fairly modest in size. The last time I identified the fact that it was 0.06% increase to the overall lot area. The existing cottage does comply with the regulatory flood elevation, and the additions will comply, predicated and based on the fact that they'll be constructed on the piers above the regulatory flood elevation. The additions are being constructed over disturbed areas. There's a hardened landscape sort of patio area in front of the existing cottage, and that sort of wraps around and rolls around to the side of the cottage. So the additions will be constructed above those areas that are already disturbed, and so that's where they're proposed. The Dryland Boathouse, I don't believe. I mean, it's a permitted structure under normal circumstances. So, in terms of factoring into the numerical value of minor, I mean, it'll be designed wet flood proof to flood, and its contents do float. That's the idea. As I said before, it's 182 feet back from the shoreline. It's well hidden from view, buffered from view from the neighbors and the shoreline. And it's located in an area that's already been disturbed. The driveway, present driveway is below the regulatory flood elevation, but under the existing zoning bylaw, the owner would be allowed to bring that up to the regulatory flood elevation to make it comply. So there's no issue with respect to access. There shouldn't be any issue with respect to Springfield Farm Road. There's only that one pinch point where the culvert crosses in front of if you will, the white farmhouse, Hollingshead White Farmhouse, and it does meet the flood elevation, save and except the wave uprush. And I believe Dan Duke and maybe Sandy Forsyth are also online today, and Dan might want to discuss that maybe perhaps a bit further if committee has any further questions. And of course, this is a lake situation. It's not your river situation where flow velocities and the amount of water contributing to a floodplain is much slower, rather than it being rather fast and rapid during flood events. Mentioned before, the owner would love to move to the town of Huntsville. He's trying to make his cottage his home. Just needs a bit more space and to fully enjoy the recreational amenities of his and attributes of his property and of the lake. So anyways, respectfully request committee approve the application. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that, Lanny. I will read the motion that is before us. So it has been moved by Councillor Wiebe, seconded by Councillor Stone. It is recommended that Planning Committee recommend to Council that zoning bylaw amendment Z21 2021 HT be denied. So with that, I will ask if there are questions or comments from committee. Oh, no questions or comments. Okay, then see, Councillor Wiebe.
Thank you, Chair Alcock. Yeah, I'm still trying to get my head around the idea of what is minor and what isn't. The structure out front, I kind of estimated it would be larger than it is, and I think it's coming in at 11 feet. And I don't know if staff have a comment on how to determine what is minor and what isn't. It certainly is a gray area, but I do, in that respect, I do kind of agree with Lanny in that it being on piers would perhaps strengthen their argument that the impact on the flood and or the flooding would be basically none because of the way it's constructed. So I guess I'm wondering if there's a comment on that that interpretation of the word minor.
Okay, Richard?
Yeah, that's a great question. So through you, Madam Chair, everyone is quite right. There is no definition for what is minor, either in our official plan or in the provincial parliament. Some municipalities actually will state, a 50% increase is all that would be allowed, or a 10% increase is all that would be allowed. In our provisions, we have no such distinction. So, I would say what we were looking at is, and I think you're right, without having a number to work on, then you kind of have to look at whether or not they've addressed the impacts and whether or not through addressing it, the concern is now made minor. So I would agree with that approach. It does look like the work done by Mr. Duke, and perhaps we could hear from him about that work, but it does look like the work done by Mr. Duke has demonstrated that these additions to the home can be done in a way that those impacts would be mitigated. But then we have to think about, the combination of the overall development. And so it's the additions to the home and the Dryland Boathouse. And so I think what staff was saying is if it was just the additions, then it's been looked at and those concerns have been addressed. So the minor test has been achieved, but it is also the boathouse. So we just said overall there would be a concern.
Thank you for that. And I noticed, Councillor Wiebe, you have your follow-up.
Okay, yes, and that does lead me to my next kind of concern, which is I read it the same way, that the mitigation measures on the actual dwelling would constitute minor, but then adding on a 90 odd square meter building seems to not be minor. That seems like a pretty big piece of building in an area that, regardless of whose mapping we use, is in a flood zone, right? So I guess I'm wondering what the process would be if committee felt, as I do, that I'd be comfortable with the cottage alterations, but I can't seem to square the addition of the garage.
Can may I ask a question? I thought I heard Lanny say that the Dryland Boathouse and the gazebo had been removed, but maybe I didn't hear that correctly. Lanny, are you still there? Maybe I think I wrote something down. Maybe I didn't hear that correctly.
Out front, or they're being removed, but not the structure to be constructed.
Okay, gotcha. All right, gotcha. Right. Okay. Thanks for that. All
Yeah,
right. So-
and if I could, oh, there he is. I was just going to say, Lanny might be having technical difficulties this morning, so
Yes, okay. All right, I see him. I
I
see.
got it. The little sign came on the thing saying that I couldn't get on to your website, the video stuff.
You're here now, though. You're here now, though. So
Yeah.
I miss, it's okay. I think it was clarified for me. I made a mistake. I thought you had said the Dryland Boathouse had been removed, but it hasn't.
Not from the application.
No,
The,
okay.
the small little one close to the shoreline is being removed. There's like a little shed.
Were you able, Lenny, to hear Councillor Weep's comments?
Yeah, about the minor additions to the cottage versus the Dryland Boathouse itself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I had indicated that, in my opinion, from a minor perspective, a boathouse is a permitted use. It's intended to be wet flood proof, so it's supposed to flood. Its contents are intended, they float like life jackets and boats. So I would think that adding the boathouse in terms of overall impact with respect to the flood plain and property damage, those are already factored into the equation. Under most circumstances, a boathouse would be permitted. I mean, so how, I'm just saying, what difference does it make if it's meant to flood, whether it's included as part of the calculation, the 50% versus doubling the 50%. I don't quite see it being the same. It's like comparing apples and oranges versus apples and apples.
Okay.
In my view.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Weep?
Thanks for that. I tend to agree. However, I mean, if given the service of the building, you could argue that it's a garage to house cars, right? Does that matter? I mean, if a garage fills up that has 2 cars in it and they start floating and bobbing around, are we okay with that? Because I don't imagine it'll just be boats in that structure. When I look at that picture, it's a garage. So I have to assume that vehicles will be in that garage.
All right, Councillor Stone.
Thank you. Further to those points, can I ask Richard to tell us about the fact that this is a permitted use, and is the permitted use smaller than what's being asked for?
Richard.
yes, so that's a great question. Unfortunately, it's not a really clear answer. The zoning bylaw does say in the natural resource zone that a boathouse is a permitted use, but it does also say that it qualifies that by saying it's a permitted use accessory to a dwelling where that's permitted on basically a split zone property. So if a property had, portions of rural and portions along the frontage that were flooded and natural resource, if the dwelling was on that rural part, then you would be allowed to have a boathouse on your flooded shoreline portion. So that's kind of the actual interpretation of the rules, but it is a bit of a hard one. So I guess I could just say it's a bit of a hard one. It would be permitted if the property had multiple zones and the dwelling was permitted in that other zone. In this instance, there's a weird situation because a dwelling is permitted in the floodplain zone itself because of special site-specific exemption. So maybe I could agree that Lanny has a point there. So I hope that answers your question.
Councillor Stone, follow up.
Thank you. And is there any limitation on size?
No, there'd be no limitation on size for this dryland boathouse, other than the OP policies do talk about development below the floodplain being minor. So, that's what I would say about that. The other thing, just to point out, just to not lose sight of, but there is provincial policy to consider, and the provincial policy talks about minor development being allowed, but then it adds additional tests, and that's why Mr. Duke had to go back and do that additional work. So those additional tests deal with the question of whether or not that minor work can be flood proofed. So I think in this instance, the dryland boathouse is going to be flood proofed. It's going to be wet flood proofed. It also talks about whether or not there's going to be any environmental impacts. And in this instance, it's in a cleared portion of the property. And then the one sticking point is it talks about the whether or not there's safe access to the property. So it does come back to that a little bit, and whether or not we agree that the size of this is minor. Maybe I'd just leave it there.
Okay. So, Councillor Fitzgerald.
Thanks, Chair Alcock. I guess this question is for Richard. Richard, I couldn't really tell the elevations of the driveway when you had your screen up with the elevations on the road and access. I'm just wondering how much driveway is below the actual level, and I don't have that number written down. I usually do, and how far below? Are we talking a couple inches of water, or are we talking about a meter of water? So if you could pull that drawing up and we could discern from that, maybe that would be helpful for me. Thank you, Richard.
Can I just interject just for 1 minute? Dan has had raised his hand, and he's available to.
Okay, okay, that's great. Sorry, Lenny, I could not see that on my screen, so my apologies. All right, yeah. And I think to Councillor Fitzgerald's question, that probably Dan would be a good person to respond to that.
Hi, Chair Alcock. Actually, Dan just raised his hand. It wasn't previously raised, so I'll move him over to the meeting right now.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Fitzgerald, would you still like to see the drawing though, the topographical?
I think it would be helpful in descriptor, and I couldn't discern the numbers from the resolution on the screen, so, and I don't have that drawing in my package, so it would be helpful for me, yes.
Okay, somebody could, would that be Richard? Can you put that up, or?
Well, I'll just ask Dan. Dan, would it help if I share my screen so you can speak to that?
Am I on yet?
Yes, you are. We can hear you. We can hear you.
Oh, there I am. I was on an empty.
Hear you and see you all at the same time.
Okay. Yeah, if we could. Well, good morning, Chair and Council. I'm happy. Dan Duke from Duke Engineering. Yeah, if you can pull that map up, I can explain it a little bit here. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to talk, if we go back to Springfield Road, they always use the static flood elevation when they do mapping. The reason why is because wave uprush is a function of where you are on the lake. It's based on fetch and water depth and a whole bunch of other issues. So when the M&R gives you the wave uprush, that's what happens at the shore. If you're back in behind trees, or there's any obstruction, if the fetch is different, if the wind is different. So we would never take wave run up into account for the flood elevation at a culvert or something. And in this particular case, for this project, because the house was already built to the static plus the flood elevation, we didn't recalculate the flood elevation for this particular piece of property. It may have been lower just because of the fetch distance, and it's quite shallow out front and everything. But we didn't go through that exercise for this property. It was already built to that higher elevation, so we just assumed we're just going to leave it there. But if we look at the Springfield Road, so I've given the elevation in meters above sea level I've given in metric the elevation above the 100-year static flood, and then I've converted that over to inches. So if we start at the top, the road outside of the purple line there, so we're 16 inches above the 100-year flood. Right at the edge, we're 13.5. Generally at the culvert, we're 18.5 inches above the 100-year flood. We move back a little bit, we're 27, and then just at the southern edge of the 100-year flood, we're about 3 feet above the 100-year flood. So that road is well above. Now the culvert itself works out to just about what I have there, but that's about a couple of inches below the 100-year flood. So I think what the LiDAR picked up in the hatch report was the culvert itself, not the road. So I think that's so I think Springfield Road is well above any concerns. And there is that little stone house that Holland's Head have had there for, a century or more, kind of telling the truth. If it had a flooded, that house, probably they wouldn't have built it, or they would have abandoned it. So I think I'm pretty comfortable that Springfield Road isn't going to flood at that culvert where the hatch report identifies it to be flooded. Now, if we move up to the actual house itself, I guess if we want to start at the left-hand side and move in, so just at the right boundary, where are we? Okay. Oh, we can start at the garage. So the garage is 0.38 of a meter, or about 16 inches above the static flood level. So the garage floor, and our client, Mr. Matursky, did say that the garage did not flood in 2019. So that's kind of supported by our elevations. As we move back out towards Springfield Road, it's about 5 inches below, then drops to 8 inches, 10 inches, 12 inches, 15, 14, 3, and then we're about 5 inches above, just inside that 100-year flood line. Now, it's my understanding that when you built the house, one of the conditions was that the driveway needed to be raised to the 100-year flood elevation. So I'm kind of looking at this as a deficiency that should have been done back when they built the house. Probably nothing was followed up, but I think this is a deficiency on the initial build, and this should be done as part of the original permit application when the house was constructed. So, and I think Mr. Matursky is quite happy to, now that he knows his driveway is below the 100-year flood, he'd be quite happy to raise it up a little bit, and so he has safe access to his property. So the Springfield Road doesn't flood, and I think our client is more than happy to put some more gravel in his driveway to raise it up the required amount, so that he's above the 100-year flood rate to the garage. Another point that was raised, and I'm out on Scout Lake. I'm in an area where it's all NR and everything. I have a Dryland Boathouse. What I did was in my foundation, I extended the concrete foundation wall up to the 100-year flood level, and then put the wood frame garage or Dryland Boathouse on top of that. So that's how they're typically flood proof. You don't want any material below that. All the designs we do, a Dryland Boathouse, I think people have to consider it the same as a boathouse on your dock, that when it floods, and if you have stuff in there, it's going to get wet. So it's no different. And they have to treat it as a Dryland Boathouse. It has to be designed so that when it gets wet, it doesn't rot. Same as a boathouse out on a dock. And a lot of people, they store their boat in there. Anything else is, once it's gotten wet a couple of times, people know enough they're going to store, their outboard motor oil. They need to put it up on a shelf, not set it on the dock. And so I think that's just part of what a Dryland Boathouse is versus a garage. It's about, and in terms of the structures, because they're going to be on piers or helical piles, the floor structure just needs to be built out of, pressure treated lumber. So if it does get wet, it doesn't rot. Spray foam instead of fiberglass insulation in the floor. So again, if it gets wet, it doesn't cause decay. But we've got lots of examples of these cottages all over the place. They're old cottages. They're probably a little bit within the 100-year flood zone, and they get wet every once in a while, and then they just dry out. So I think we're looking at the same thing for this building. And again, it's going to be that void space underneath. So we're not putting a foundation in of any sort. There's going to be a void space. So when if and when the waves come in, they'll just go right underneath the structure. They won't be pounding up against the side of it or anything.
Okay, Dan, thank you for that. And if you wouldn't mind, right, perfect. Thank you. Councillor Fitzgerald, did you have a follow-up given all of that information?
I was satisfied with all that information and I'm processing it, and I'll let you know if there's any more questions. Thank
Okay.
you.
Your hand was still up, so that's why I asked. So, okay, well, we've heard that. And are there any other questions? All right, so I've read the motion, and I am going to call the question. All those in favor? Okay, all those opposed? So, all right, so that's 1, 2, 3. 3 opposed. That carries then as far as being opposed to this denial. I guess that, may I ask Director Maxwell where that leaves us?
Sorry, Madam Chair, I was just going to clarify whether or not there were amendments being proposed prior to.
No one suggested an amendment, so
Okay.
that's what we've got. We have just, we haven't supported the denial recommendation. There hasn't been an amendment. And that's that. So therefore we don't, Julie's saying to me, we don't have a resolution with respect to this. Director Maxwell, I need direction on this.
I believe that if anyone wanted to actually approve the zoning amendment, they would have to put forth a resolution now. But because the question was called, I'm not sure what. We'll have to have Julie to weigh in on that part. Sorry.
Julie, I'm sorry, you were trying to weigh in, and then I went directly to Director Maxwell. Okay, there it is.
Sorry, this is a little bit.
I can't hear Julie.
Can't hear Julie. No.
I still can't hear Julie.
Our apologies. We have issues with the sound system here in the chamber. So Julie, do you want to come over here or what it would work? All right. This is really unusual, I know, but.
I can try to turn my volume on, but I think we're going to get feedback. I just wanted to see. Yeah.
Can you hear Julie now?
Yeah.
My apologies, it's going to have some feedback. Sorry.
Okay, guys, give us a second. We're going to try and figure this out, okay? Because it's all to do with the technology. And as everybody knows, I'm not a techno wizard. Unless you want me to explain what needs to happen.
Yeah, we can do that. I'm sorry, it's just not like, because it's going to do feedback.
Okay,
Yeah.
so what needs to happen?
So what needs to happen is.
We need a motion to reconsider
a
if
motion
someone
to
is.
Consider, and then they would essentially have to put an amendment on the table.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that was, if people are considering that they wanted to put an amendment on the table, we need a motion to reconsider. And so first, I will ask if there is a motion to reconsider. Councillor Fitzgerald, your hand is up.
I would be happy to put a motion forward to reconsider.
Okay, so can I just call the question on the motion to reconsider?
We have a mover.
All right, is there a seconder to reconsider? Councillor Wiebe. Okay, so we've got that. I will call the question. All those in favor for reconsideration? 1, 2, 3. 3, it carries. Okay, so in order to reconsider, so now are you proposing, Councillor Fitzgerald, a motion to amend?
Yes.
Okay, and what would your motion to amend be?
to approve, not deny.
Okay, so simply a replacement of the word deny with approve. Councillor Stone, would you like to add to that?
So yes, so like Councillor Weeb mentioned, this would be easily a minor variance if it didn't include the garage. And so I suppose my question to Richard is, if the garage is allowed, if we remove the condition that this application has this Dryland Boathouse / garage, if we remove the garage and approve it, can the applicant just build the garage because it's allowed?
Interesting. Richard?
That's a very good question. So I think and we have some language ready to go if it would help committee for a recommended substitute motion to approve. And it would have some nuances in it. So it would stipulate that we're dealing with a permission for a 168 square meter dwelling. It would stipulate that, and it would be a flood-proof dwelling. We would stipulate the size of the garage that we want to approve, and we would stipulate that it needs to be a wet flood-proof dwelling. And then there are other items in there that we would want to include. So if it helps, we can put that up. And I guess their options before you would be to, look at the list and say which ones you're comfortable with and which ones you might want to tweak. So
Richard,
like to see-
that would be very helpful. And then all of committee can look at that and see what works for them or what doesn't. That would be very helpful.
Okay. So Julie, if you could share that, that would be great.
Sorry. Julie's looking for it.
We're just checking something on the motion to.
Okay, you know what? I'm taking, I apologize for this. We're taking a 5-minute break because we're checking the motion to reconsider and I'm not sure why. So it's 4:40, it's 10:44. So in 5 minutes, we'll reconvene, okay? Okay, thanks everybody for that. Julie has something that we can now share. And my apologies for this process. It was a bit odd, but here we are. So there we go. We've got proposed wording for an amendment. Here we are. So, and I believe, I don't think we have a seconder for this amendment, Councillor Fitzgerald. Is there a seconder? Well,
I was under the impression.
Councillor Weed. Thank you, Councillor Weed. All right. So moved by Councillor Fitzgerald, seconded by Councillor Weed. It is recommended that Planning Committee recommend approval of zoning bylaw amendment Z21 2021 HT, the purpose and effect of which is to amend the existing NR with exception 1302 zone for the subject lands to a natural resource with amended exception 1302 to permit a flood-proof dwelling with a maximum of, I think that's a maximum lot coverage of 168 meters squared, permit a wet flood-proofed dryland boathouse with a maximum lot coverage of 93 square meters, require the minimum elevation for openings to have habitable buildings and structures, including elevations of any bed of a septic system to be above the 286.46 meters ASL contour line, apply the yard requirements for the shoreline residential 1 zone, and continue to apply all other provisions contained in exception 1302, except as altered by the above. Councillor Weed.
Actually, that was just for indicating that I'm a seconder. I'm just going to give that some thought, but
Okay, sorry, your hand was still up, so
yeah, sorry.
Okay. So questions or comments with respect to the proposed amendment? All right, no, okay, if there aren't. So Councillor Stone, I think you have a hand up, followed by Councillor Weed.
So can I ask Richard to just itemize each of those, because there's something new in there, the septic system.
Okay.
And this does include, in addition to this, there will be a site plan for shoreline vegetation, et cetera.
Okay, Richard.
Yeah, so just keeping in mind that those shoreline structures were non-complying, non-conforming structures. So we are not recognizing these, so they will be removed, and we've heard that that would happen. We are recognizing the request and for a 168 square meter dwelling, but it's going to be a flood-proofed one. So that's the first bullet. The second bullet deals with the garage, and it gives the approval for the garage as requested. So the entire thing, and it would be a wet flood-proof garage as proposed. And then the third bullet deals with the minimum elevations for openings. And it's very similar to what's in the current exception. And the septic system is also in the current exception. So it just changes the elevation that was previously there to the current standard. So 28.6.46. So that's why that's needed. And then the last two bullets address the other provisions that were in the exception. So the yard requirements would be for the SR property or an SR zoned lands, and the other items listed in exception 1302 would continue to apply. So that's what
vegetation.
Yeah, and site plan control would continue to apply for the vegetation. So yeah.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Councillor Armour, I noticed you have your hand up. Lanny had his hand up, and I was wondering, Lanny, is it to respond to Councillor Stone's question?
I just wanted to clarify that it is a dryland boathouse. Reference continues to be made to a garage. He already has a garage on the property. It's an attached garage. It's beside the existing dwelling. And the idea behind demolishing the so-called dryland boathouse, if you will, that shed that's near the shoreline, is to take anything that's stored in there, remove it from the shoreline, and put it back in behind to the Dryland Boathouse. That's the idea.
Okay,
Get the structure off the shoreline, get the activity off the shoreline, and move it 182 feet back.
okay. That's helpful. Thank you for that. Councillor Armour, followed by Councillor Weed.
Thank you, Chair Alcock. I've been quiet all so far this morning. I'm just curious, should we have anything here about the driveway because it being below the flood line now? Currently,
Add that the owner will in fact raise it as was suggested earlier. That might. Are you requesting that new wording, Richard? Is that possible?
No, thank you. So through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Armour, that wording is not needed because that wording is already part of the current exception. So they are permitted to elevate the driveway under the current zoning. So that's that last bullet. All other provisions continue to apply. So they can do that.
Okay, good. Councillor Weep. Lanny, you still have your hand up. If you wouldn't mind taking it down, that would be great. Thank you. Councillor Weep.
Thank you, Chair Alcock. So I guess Lanny highlights for me some clarity in my mind as to how to address the Dryland Boathouse and my misgivings slightly. I think that if we were to take, as he said, take the things that are on the shoreline, move them to the back and house them, I believe that the structure being proposed is actually far in excess of what would be needed because what was there is for a single boat and some storage. And what's proposed is a two garage sort of bay garage boathouse with an additional area for storage. So I think I would propose an amendment to shrink the size of that structure to better reflect what's existing.
Right.
So I'm not sure.
Like for like, in a way.
I mean, obviously, there's always going to be a bit of a need for upgrading, you know, when you think of these historical boathouses or whatever. But I think the double bay and the a lot of extra storage, I think is that starts to push against that idea of minor. So I would probably change the wording. I would probably put a limit on the size that's acceptable, and then I would be in favor of voting.
Okay. You have a number?
I think 65 square, you know what I mean, is about right. Probably knocking a third off of it, or 70 square. I would bring it down to a single slip, which is for the single boat and all the storage needed for accessory items, and then that should suffice.
Okay. And Julie's making note of that. That will be another red line in our red lined amendment. Councillor Stone, I'm not sure. No, you didn't have your hand up. Okay.
I was just nodding.
Nodding. Okay. Thank you. I'm very sensitive right now that I'm, catching everything. All right. So,
Chair Alcock, if I could just quickly interrupt, my apologies. We do have an attendee that is with the applicants who is continuously raising their hand. I know we're in the decision time. I just figured I'd let you know we don't want to bring them into the meeting currently, correct?
no, we've given the applicant or their representative an opportunity. And at this point that we've had two of the applicant's representatives, and I don't think we need to add another.
I agree. I just want to make them aware of that.
And I totally appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, yes, if you, Julie's about to share the final red line, and then that I will. Okay, so it's the same as I read.
My apologies.
So, oh, I see. I get it. Yeah. All right. So the only difference is it contained within the second bullet of the proposed amendment, and it reads permit a wet flood-proof dryland boathouse with a maximum lot coverage of 70 square meters. So other than that, everything else is the same as I read before. We can take it down. Our finally, last call, Councillor Weeb.
So just to clarify, the original structure that was there, do we know the size of it? Because what was being proposed is a 93 square meter dryland boathouse. My estimation is if you reduce that by about 25%, 70s should be adequate. But that's under the assumption that it was for a single slip. The original boathouse was much smaller than that, if I'm not mistaken. But I want to just clarify that before I vote.
Okay, so I am going to ask Lanny or Dan. Dan is now coming on, so who would like to respond to Councillor Weeb's question? Neither. Richard. Richard's going to take a stab at that. Thank you. Richard, you're on mute.
I know, I was doing calculations.
Okay,
Sorry.
all right. No, that's great.
So I believe, thank you, through you, Madam Chair, the size of the existing marine storage shed or dryland boathouse with the deck around it, according to site plans provided, would be 15.6 meters squared. So that's what that structure is now.
15 versus, and we're proposing 70? Is that,
Yeah.
Lanny? Lanny?
Yeah, I've got the total that I have on the site plan is 136 and 30, 176, about 177, rounded off 180 square feet for a little boathouse. But the dryland boathouse that is proposed as identified and put forward by Councillor Weeb also recognizes the fact that he does have a boat and the boat, rather than going to a marina to be stored, he's able to deal with that on his own property. So.
Okay, so Councillor Weeb?
So I'm okay with that. I think it's more than generous, and I'm willing to let that stand.
Okay. All right, final call, last comment. Seeing none, I will call the question on the proposed amendment that we just shared on the screen. All those in favor? 1, 2, 3. And that carries. Actually, okay, my apologies. Julie's not going to put the main motion as amended, but it's this identical, if it's identical to what we just read. I have to call the main motion as amended. All those in favor? And that's carried. All those opposed? It carries. All right. Thank you, everybody, for that unbelievably long item.
Thanks you.
We can now move along to the second item of today, which is, it is over to Kelsey with report number development 2022-71, Z23-2021 HT, and B4445 2021, Pacinda 25 and 35 Rowanwood Lane. The mayor is back with us.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. So I won't be sharing any screen, I'll just be reading off my notes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, the subject properties are located at 25 and 35 Rowanwood Lane. This item is back before you as the applications were deferred at the March 13th, 2022 Planning Committee meeting. Until such time staff were able to prepare a draft zoning bylaw encompassing the requests of committee, as well as updated comments from the Mary Lake Association. A draft bylaw was prepared and was outlined in the report. It is worth noting there were some changes that were made in conjunction with the agent to further illustrate the required frontages for each lot and illustrate the amended conservation zone. This was sent to committee prior to the last meeting. Please note that the applicant had requested an 18 square meter dock envelope. However, staff kept the dock envelope at 10 square meters to reflect committee's comments. The Mary Lake Association provided updated comments, which were also provided to committee. Despite the revisions and the updated comments, staff have determined the previous analysis of our policies still applies, and the application remains to not meet the official plan and the provincial policy statement. In light of this information, staff are still recommending denial. Thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for that, Kelsey. And at this point, if the applicant or their representative is here and wanted to speak to this application, now would be the time. So please indicate by raising your hand.
The applicant or the representative are reminded to use the raise hand button to indicate that they would like to address committee. And Chair Alcock, I do see one hand, and I will now bring them into the meeting.
Thank you.
A reminder to please have your microphone and video, if possible, turned on before you begin speaking, and to confirm your name and mailing address.
Good morning. Again, Chair Alcock, Committee, Lanny Dennis, Wayne Simpson and Associates, 3-76 King William Street, Huntsville, Ontario, P1H 1W4. Represent the owners, and as identified by the planner, the application, the request was deferred from the previous meeting to prepare a draft zoning bylaw and sketch. WSA did that and forwarded to staff, and they had further revisions to that bylaw. Just to highlight what it's done is basically it's the sketch itself is a comprehensive. It encapsulates comprehensively the mitigation measures that have been recommended by the soils investigation. As well as other comments over the past little while. We identified the septic and dwelling envelopes, and those were brought forward from the soils investigation, and they're considerable distance back from the shoreline. The septics are range somewhere between 150 to 200 meters back. There's no boathouses proposed. A portion of the northerly severed lot has been rezoned from a shoreline residential 3 to a conservation zone. So we actually downzoned that and provided a conservation zone. It was done so a dock was proposed in that location on the northerly lot, as well as sort of on the southerly portion of the northerly lot. So the dock location was chosen because we weren't having to go through an area that was already zoned conservation. It was put to the northerly portion where there wasn't a conservation zone. The building envelopes, talked about septic, the building envelopes are range somewhere between 40 to 100 meters back, depending on the lot that you're looking at. Basically, the Mary Lake Association was identified by the planner that they had no concerns subject to certain conditions that they wanted implemented through the zoning bylaw, which I believe are captured in the zoning bylaw. And the cumulative width, because we reduced it on the northerly lot, could have been 15 meters, but now that's been reduced to only a 1.5 meter wide pathway to get to the dock location. So that would summarize my comments and respectfully request committee approve the bylaw. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for that. I do have a motion moved by Councillor Armour, seconded by Councillor Wiebe. It is recommended that Planning Committee deny zoning bylaw amendment Z23 2021 HT, the purpose and effect of which is to amend the existing shoreline residential 3 zone for the subject lands to a shoreline residential 3 zone with exception, and a shoreline residential 3 zone with exception to permit a proposed lot of a lot addition and new lot creation. So are there any questions or comments with respect to this current motion before us? Councillor Wheat or Fitzgerald, sorry.
Thank you, Chair Alcock. Previously, I made a motion to approve this application. And I think that I still am in favor of approving this application. And I'm glad that the Mary Lake Association realized the benefits of the changes that have been made, and that hopefully I can have a seconder on that.
Is there a seconder for Councillor Fitzgerald to approve? Councillor Weeb. So we have.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, no, I jumped the gun.
No, I was just going to say, yeah, I would approve, vote to approve it as well. I was somewhat in favor last time around, but seeing the response from Mary Lake certainly kind of pushed me over the top.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we then now have a motion. Can we share that, Julie? Apparently it's going to be 2 pages because it will have the full, so it's not just a straight from deny to approve.
Because the bylaw would be more language, so
There'll be more, the bylaw will need more language if we're now approving it. So we had a motion moved by Councillor Fitzgerald, seconded by Councillor Weeb. It is recommended that the following recommendation, do I have to read that? No, I don't have to read it again because it was the previous deny, be substituted for the following. It is recommended that Planning Committee approve zoning bylaw amendment Z 23/2021 HT, the purpose of, do I read the rest of that? I do. Purpose and effect of which is to amend the existing shoreline residential 3 zone and conservation zone with exception 0297 to shoreline residential 3 zone with exception, shoreline residential 3 zone with exception, and conservation zone with amended exception 0297, all as shown on the property detail sketch to permit a proposed lot addition and new lot creation. Oh, and there's more. Exception. The minimum lot frontage shall be 90 meters. Development setbacks and building and septic envelopes shall be as illustrated on property detail schedule 9, and no site alteration is permitted until such time as a site plan agreement implementing all recommendations of the water quality impact assessment report prepared by Palmer has been approved by the town. Further exception, the minimum lot frontage shall be 60 meters. The development setbacks and building envelope shall be as illustrated on property detail schedule 9, and no site alteration is permitted until such time as a site plan agreement implementing all recommendations of the water quality impact assessment report prepared by Palmer has been approved by the town. And exception 0297 amended. A 10 square meter dock, existing boathouse, and 1.5 meter path shall be the only permitted disturbance and shall be located as illustrated in a property detail schedule 9. And no site alteration is permitted until such time as a site plan agreement implementing all recommendations of the water quality impact assessment report prepared by Palmer has been approved by the town. That's it. That's it. Oh, okay. Are there questions or comments? Mayor Terziano.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Through you to Kelsey. I realize that we have a maximum dock size of basically just over 100 square feet. But is there any limitation to how that dock is constructed? I.e., could it be 2 feet by 50 feet and project out into that narrow waterway?
Great.
Like, is there any limit as to how far that dock can project out?
Good question. Kelsey?
Thank you for the question. Through you, Madam Chair, there is a dock projection zoning listed in our zoning bylaw for a narrow water body. So there is something in the bylaw that speaks to that. But if you wanted to further prescribe the dimensions, you're free to do that.
Okay, so Mayor Terziano, did you want to further prescribe? Or are you comfortable?
Can you just tell me what it is currently in the bylaw? Or?
I think off the top of my head, it's 6 meters, but if somebody is able to correct me if I'm wrong, yes. Kirsten,
I see lots of nodding heads.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Are there any other comments or questions with respect to the amendment? Okay, seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? All those opposed? Okay, it carries the amendment. And so I am now going to call the question on the main motion as amended. All those in favor? And that carries. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time and consideration of these items this morning. Really do appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. And that, just to remind myself, that was moved by Fitzgerald and seconded by Councillor Weeb, right? The amendment. All right. Thank you for that. So moving right along, we're back to you, Kelsey, with report number development 2022-06 as amended, Z32 2021 HT Huckle 938 Jones Lane.
Great. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Through you, the subject property is located at 938 Jones Lane. This item is back before you as it was deferred on the January 18th meeting until such time as additional detail was provided on revegetation and other measures to mitigate impacts and achieve a net benefit, including a detailed revegetation and shoreline restoration plan where feasible, and scaling down of the development where appropriate to achieve a net improvement. These items have now been provided to the town for review and are outlined in the report. The proponent provided an updated revegetation plan prepared by Riverstone Environmental Solutions, Inc., and further information regarding the legal status of existing development. With the 98.9 square meters of revegetation, the relocation of the septic system, and the removal of new development within the shoreline buffer, and the reduction of needed release upon consideration of what was already existing in that legal status, staff are now recommending approval as the application would appear to conform to the intent of the official plan and be consistent with the provincial policy statement. Thank you so much, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. And for that, I will ask if the applicant or the applicant's representative is here and would like to speak to this.
The applicants or their representative are reminded to use the raise hand button to indicate that they would like to address the committee. And in Chair Alcock, I do see one hand and will now bring them into the meeting.
Thank you.
A reminder to please have your microphone and video, if possible, turned on before you begin speaking, and to confirm your name and mailing address.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of committee. John Gallagher, John P. Gallagher and Associates, 24 Hibbard Road, Huntsville, P1H 1C9. Also with me is Al Shaw from Riverstone Environmental, as well as property owner Kevin Huckle. I think Kelsey outlined the application well. After our last meeting, we met with staff and they had asked for a number of items from us, and the owner complied by having Riverstone provide a more detailed revegetation plan for the property. A couple of other items that should be noted with the proposed bylaw, the applicants have agreed to decrease their accessory coverage down to 2%. So that only allows the existing dock to remain. It would not allow any additional development beyond what is proposed to be approved. The increased coverage of the existing development over the proposed development represents about 1% of the property, just over 200 square feet larger than the current. The application was circulated to the neighbors. Both neighbors on either side supported the application. The District of Muskoka stated that the application conforms with the district official plan. Staff at the local level confirmed that meets the intent of the official plan and are supporting the application. As well, with respect to the provincial policy statement, the proposal is consistent with the PPS 2020. We think that we've come up with a good plan for this minor addition to the cottage. It will consolidate two of the buildings into one. We're not proposing anything within the shoreline buffer for new buildings. Staff also asked us to remove the roof above the hot tub that's on the current deck, and my client had no issue with that as well. We would respectfully submit request that you approve the application according to the staff recommendation. I'm here to answer any questions. Al Shaw and the owner are also here if there's something specific to those issues.
Okay. Thanks very much, John. And so I actually will go to committee next, Jennifer, unless the others wanted to say. I think John was speaking on behalf of everybody. Okay,
the property owner does have their hand raised.
Oh, do they? Okay, we'll let them. Yep.
Perfect, I'll bring them in now. A reminder to please have your microphone and video if possible turned on before you begin speaking, and to confirm your name and mailing address.
Hello.
Hello, I'm Kevin Huckle, 938 Jones Lane, Huntsville, Ontario. Sorry, I'm in a business meeting today and I'm sitting in a hotel room in downtown Toronto. Just wanted to thank everyone for addressing. I really only wanted to be on as an observer, and I will let Mr. Gallagher speak on my behalf.
Okay, great. Thanks very much for participating. Okay.
Thanks.
All right. With that, could you turn your mute back on, please?
Sorry.
That's okay. And I will at this point ask if Julie, could you put the motion on the screen and I will read it. We do have a motion moved by Councillor Fitzgerald, seconded by Mayor Terziano. It is recommended that Planning Committee recommend approval of zoning bylaw amendment said 32 2021 HT, the purpose and effect of which is to change the zoning from a shoreline residential 1 zone to a shoreline residential 1 with exception zone to permit the following. Recognize the existing 8.6 meter front yard setback for a hot tub. Increase primary lot coverage from 10% to 17%, reduce accessory lot coverage from 5% to 2%, reduce the easterly side yard setback from 6 meters to 2.3 meters for a 75 square meter garage addition, reduce the westerly side yard setback from 6 meters to 4.8 meters for a 69 square meter rear covered porch addition, reduce the front yard setback from 20 meters to 15 meters for 75 square meter garage addition and 69 square meter rear covered porch addition, and reduce the setback to type 1 fish habitat from 30 meters to 15 meters for a 75 meter squared garage addition and 69 square meter rear covered porch addition. I think I've flipped back and forth all the way through. Anyway, are there questions or comments with respect to this? Yes, Councillor Weed.
Thank you, Chair Alcock. I was wondering if staff can put up the drawing again, just to have an overview. I want to look again closer at that setback from type 1.
Okay. Thank you. Kelsey, you'll do that?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. I'm just preparing my screen. Is everyone able to see that?
Yep, I can. The numbers are a bit blurry, but Councillor Weeb, are you set? Can you see it?
I can. I'm just looking closer at it. So sorry if I can ask my question at this point. Mm-hmm. So the motion reads to
reduce
less, right, this from type 1 for the garage and the covered porch addition?
Yeah,
It strikes me that the garage is already further back.
That's a good point. Is it? Yes. So Kelsey, is that correct? Are we reading it incorrectly?
So there's two things at play here. So there's two provisions. So there's the setback from type 1 fish habitat, which is 30 meters. So it's going to be 15, and there you can kind of see because of the angle it hits there, but it's and then there's the 20 meter that's required for the lot if it didn't have type 1 fish habitat. So that's why there's two provisions. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but
It does actually. And then so the porch out front, that's covered or not covered?
It's not covered. Originally, they had a proposal to cover a portion of this, and they've removed that. So now there's nothing. You can see this dashed line, pinkish line is the 15-meter shoreline buffer. So now anything that's new is behind that line, because originally in the original proposal there was something new proposed here, but that's no longer there.
And then on the rear side, sorry, the black hatched is the addition that is enclosed and covered.
Yes, this is the rear covered porch. I combined these two numbers just to make it simplified, and then this is the garage.
So, okay, that makes it much clearer in my head. And it also strikes me that we're putting a lot of hard surface really close to the shoreline. And I don't know what benefit, what's the benefit in that?
So everything, like in terms of the analysis that they did, Riverstone, so they've added all this in the understory, and they've also reduced the amount. They've changed the septic location, so now there's nothing new in the shoreline buffer, and now we're getting more revegetation. So that's the balance that we kind of struck with the applicant.
Okay, I appreciate that. I guess what I'm saying is, once you add up all those hard surfaces, aren't we going to see water and sediment and et cetera come rushing down that hill and pour into the lake? I mean, aren't we adding to the problem with all these hard surfaces?
Yeah, I guess if I was to refer to the Riverstone report, they suggested there was no net impact. But yeah, there is further development happening on shoreline property. But it's outside of the shoreline buffer, which is preferred by staff.
So those are interesting questions. Councillor Wiebe, would you like Al Shaw? He is here to speak to that.
Maybe, and I guess the real question, I suppose, is what is the slope? What's the grade like towards the water? Because if it's very gentle, I'm sure it could be mitigated. If it was a little steeper, I think we're going to have a little bit of a private environmental disaster in front of this place. Is my feeling.
Okay, I will ask. I think earlier, Al Shaw. Yeah, John Gallagher has his hand up. So, John, are you speaking to this or?
I'll let Al answer that specific question. My hand was just up to let Councillor Wiebe know that that garage that was at the back is actually being removed, and that's where the new septic location is going. So I'll let Al deal with that issue. Thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you. And I believe, all right, great.
Chair Alcock, I do see Al's hand raised, and I'll now bring him into the meeting. A reminder to please have your microphone and video, if possible, turned on before you begin speaking, and to confirm your name and mailing address.
I think you're muted there, Chair.
Oh, my apologies. I was muted purposely because I was talking to Julie. But yeah, you're good to go. Sorry about
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair Alcock. Al Shaw, Riverstone Environmental, 47 Quebec Street in Bracebridge, P1L2A5. Great question, Councillor Wiebe. So a couple of things, and I think Kelsey noted it very well, is that we were looking for a balance here of benefits, knowing that we were going to be, the application was going to be creating more closed spaces, I guess, or covered spaces. So the balance was to provide more vegetation in the shoreline setback, so within 15 meters, to counter some of the additional water that might be coming down from the additional roof space. But also a couple of things. We're removing a building, as Mr. Gallagher said, the garage in the back, and we're taking the septic system, which is now in the position of where the garage is going to be, which is just off to the southeast side of the dwelling. Take all of that water that's going to the septic system there and move it back as far as possible on the property. And that location is basically right in the same spot as the existing garage is. And that was the balance that we were striking. Was we know that there's going to be additional covered space. We're going to be putting that water and running it through additional vegetation that's being put in. That's where the crux of the additional, or the revegetation was happening, was directly in front of where that new garage is going, and then further along, putting in understory plants where the trees are existing right now, which is sort of the darker green area of revegetation, and then providing more new vegetation in an area that's that currently doesn't have, which is sort of the lighter green there in front of it. So that's where we were at with the cost benefit analysis, I guess, a better way to call it, for the application. When we first put it in, I think committee and planning staff agreed that maybe there should be a bit more, and we had a very good conversation with Kelsey and with Richard on that, and went back to the drawing board and came up with this plan, which also include removal of a bit of a deck in the front over the hot tub, and changing of a few other things that ended up with this plan right here.
Councillor Weeb.
Thanks, Chair Alcock. So, Al, in your opinion, you think this is a net benefit compared to where we were with this property?
I absolutely do, Councillor Weeb, and I think the thing that really had me leaning towards a net benefit in the first place was the movement of the septic system, and moving it from a place where it was bumping up and maybe even ahead a little bit of the 15 meters, and now putting it back. I don't know if it's quite 30 meters. It's pretty close though. And even there, we may even see the effluent running the other way if it's built properly, having it running the other way as opposed to toward the lake at all. To me, that's a huge benefit. And then the additional revegetation and such, you know, there is some more covered space at the back of the property now. It's a deck already for much of it. So basically we're building on top of a deck and on top of a current septic system, and moving the new septic system, which will be, you know, rebuilt, modern septic system. So yes, I agree that this is overall a net benefit.
Thank you for that answer. Very helpful. All right. Are there any other questions or comments? Seeing none, then I will call the question. All those in favor of the motion as read. And that carries unanimously. So thank you for that, Kelsey.
Thank you.
Have a nice day.
All right, and everybody else, we don't have any items under new business and under general information. Richard, did you want to do a verbal update on the community planning permit, or?
I will just keep it really quick. Second draft of the community planning permit bylaw was released for public review on April 7th, I believe. It's posted on our engagement webpage, myhuntsville.ca/CPP bylaw. There was an open house, a virtual open house yesterday, or no, on Tuesday evening. And there is another open house in person this evening. And then the public meeting for this second draft will occur on Tuesday, April the 26th. All the information about that is on our webpage, the one I previously noted, and both the in-person open house and the public meeting will begin at 6 o'clock. So that's all I had to add.
Thank you for that, Councillor Weep.
Thanks, Chair Alcock. I know I'm taking a lot of space this meeting. Some of the feedback I'm getting from my constituents is they either were misreading or weren't sure or unable to even read the fine print in the newspaper. And they were concerned that they may not have an opportunity to speak at the public meeting, which is on the 26th. I know they're encouraged to submit in writing, but I assured them that if they really felt compelled to speak, that they would in fact have that opportunity. So I just wanted to put that out there again on record that, as I said, you will have the opportunity if you so desire. Is that correct?
Yes, that's 100% correct.
Okay, thank you for that. That's helpful always. Any other comments for? All right, seeing none, we are going to move. And Richard, you had put the More Homes for Everyone Act 2022 just on for information only, right? Okay.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, with that, I am going to, I have a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Stone, seconded by Mayor Terziano. It is recommended that we do hereby adjourn at 11:35 a.m. And all those in favor? That's great. Thank you very much. That's unanimous. And I have to run to go and chair another meeting. Bye all. Thank you so much.